Please don't shoot. I'll give you strong children if you spare me." He lowered his gun. But the sun was still hiding when the frost crept down the spine of the hills. A pale blue dawn leaned gently over the empty land, where wild grass whispered to itself and wind stirred the ashes from a fire long gone cold. The silence was so pure it made even the crows hesitate before taking flight. At the edge of this forgotten land stood a man, tall, weathered, and hollow in the eyes. His name was Caleb Monroe, a rancher whose hands had buried 2 brothers and a father in wars that didn't belong to him. He had long since stopped praying. He didn't smoke, didn't laugh, didn't curse. He just worked, alone. The land owed him nothing, and he took nothing more than it gave. That morning, with frost on his boots and a rifle slung over his shoulder, Caleb noticed something unusual near the barn. At first, it was only a shape, low to the ground, curled like something already gone. But the stillness of it was alive. He stepped closer. The air seemed to tighten. It was a woman, no older than 20, trembling, barefoot in the cold, arms wrapped around her knees. Her dress was torn at the hem, hair tangled like riverweed, and mud streaked down her cheek like tears. Her name, though Caleb didn't know it yet, was Evelyn Grace. When she saw him, she didn't scream, didn't run. She only raised her eyes to the barrel of the gun and whispered words that clung to the wind like breath. "Please, don't shoot. I'll give you strong children if you spare me." Caleb blinked, a pause between silence and choice. Her voice cracked like a matchstick breaking. He didn't lower the rifle right away. He studied her, not as prey, not as threat, but as a question he hadn't been asked in years. Then, slowly, his fingers moved. The rifle dipped. A crow took flight from the post nearby, breaking the stillness. Caleb spoke his first words of the day, voice hoarse from disuse. "You hungry?" Evelyn nodded. He turned without waiting for thanks and pushed open the barn door. Warmth spilled out, not from fire, but from something quieter. Safety. Behind them, the hills stood still. The world had just shifted, and not a soul but the wind had seen it. The barn was quiet, the kind of quiet that held secrets in the rafters. Caleb didn't say much as he fetched a wool blanket from an old chest and tossed it gently over Evelyn's shoulders. It was coarse and smelled faintly of cedar, but she pulled it around herself like it was spun gold. Her hands, small, cracked and shaking, gripped the edges of the cloth like she was afraid it would vanish. He didn't ask questions. Not then. Instead, he walked toward the wood-burning stove at the far end of the barn. It hadn't been used in months, but Caleb knew the way of old iron. He lit a small fire with dry twigs and a torn feed sack, and soon the soft hiss of flame filled the space between them. Evelyn sat near the stove, legs tucked under her, as if still unsure if this was real. He placed a tin bowl in front of her, mashed potatoes, cold but seasoned with salt and butter. She looked up at him, as if she didn't know whether to cry or eat. She chose the second, wordlessly, spoon-shaking. Caleb stood in the corner, watching her in the way a man watches wild deer, careful not to startle, not to assume. He noticed the bruise under her right eye, faded, but not forgotten. A leather strap peeked out from her dress sleeve, the edge worn and broken, not from work, but from restraint. There were no fresh cuts, but something about her body, always half-curled, always shrinking, spoke of a life that had taught her to disappear. He didn't ask who had done it, or why she had come. He didn't even ask her name. When she finished, she slid the bowl back without a word. Caleb took it, wiped it clean, and returned it to the shelf without looking at her. They said nothing for a long time. Then, almost without thinking, he moved to the other side of the barn and began laying fresh hay near the loft ladder. He threw an old mattress down from the upper ledge. It landed with a thump, but Evelyn didn't flinch. He handed her a second blanket, this one thinner, stitched with blue thread and a faded name tag sewn into the corner. She didn't ask whose it was. As she climbed into the makeshift bed, he turned his back, not out of shame, but of silent respect. She whispered, almost to herself, "You're not going to tell anyone, are you?" Caleb shook his head once. "Ain't my business who you're running from." And that was all. That night, he slept in the house. She slept in the barn. Neither of them rested fully, but neither of them dreamt of dying. Outside, the frost thickened. Inside, a fragile kind of safety, quiet, awkward, but unmistakably real, took root in the silence between two strangers. Morning came slow. Sunlight pushed through the cracks in the barn walls, like fingers searching for warmth. Evelyn awoke before the rooster. Breath. Fogging in the cold air, the blanket still clutched around her like armor. She didn't move. Not for a while. She watched a beam of light fall across a rusted horseshoe nailed to the far wall. Her eyes didn't blink, just stared. Later, when Caleb entered with a tin mug of hot water and honey, she was sitting upright, eyes open but far away. He set the mug near her, nodded once, and leaned against the post. Neither spoke. Then she said it, not like a confession, more like a truth tired of hiding. He said if I stayed, he'd break my legs. Said no one would marry me after he was done. Caleb didn't move. Wasn't the first time he said it. Won't be the last, unless I stay gone. Her fingers fidgeted with the edge of the blanket. Caleb asked quietly, "Your husband?" She shook her head. "My stepfather." The words hung in the barn like smoke. Ugly, clinging, impossible to clear. "I stayed because of my mother," she added, voice tight. "She told me I was lucky he fed us." Caleb sat down on an overturned bucket across from her, his boots dragging hay with them. He didn't flinch, didn't pity, just listened. The kind of listening that costs something. "I left 3 nights ago, slipped out through the chicken fence, walked till my feet bled." She showed him then, the blisters, the raw skin, the dried blood between her toes. He looked at them like a man reads scripture, carefully, without judgment. "He'll come," she whispered. "He always does, with that truck of his. He'll smell the silence and know I'm in it." That evening, just as the wind shifted and the coyotes howled from across the hills, a dust trail rose on the southern road. A rust-colored pickup. Old, loud, familiar. Caleb stood at the edge of the porch, arms crossed. Evelyn watched from the barn, crouched behind a slat. The truck didn't stop. It slowed. Then rolled by, windows down, a man's elbow resting on the edge. A sharp face, eyes hunting. It passed. But the silence it left behind was different. Heavier now. Real. Later that night, Evelyn stepped into Caleb's kitchen, barefoot, holding her blanket tight. He didn't ask how she knew he'd be up. Coffee steamed on the stove. 1 cup, no sugar. She said, almost to herself, "He carved his name into my shoulder once." She turned, slipped the blanket off one shoulder, and showed the scar. The letters were crude, raised, ugly. Caleb's jaw clenched, but his voice stayed calm. "You're safe here." She didn't answer, just sat, quiet, close. And for the first time in years she wasn't hiding, and he wasn't alone. The days that followed were neither warm nor cold, neither loud nor silent. They lived in a strange hush, the kind that comes before a storm, or after one that left something buried beneath the dirt. Evelyn stayed in the barn mostly. She helped feed the animals, mended torn saddle straps, and swept the dust that had long settled without challenge. She didn't ask to stay. Caleb didn't tell her she could, but neither mentioned leaving. Something about the way she moved, slow, deliberate, like every gesture had once cost her, made the animals calmer. Even the old mule, Jack, stopped kicking his stall when she passed. One morning, a neighbor passed through. Earl Harmon, a gruff man from the next valley over, who'd helped Caleb bury his mother 2 winters back. He rode up with a half smile and a jug of molasses, calling out before dismounting. Caleb stepped out of the barn, wiping his hands on a towel. "You got someone living out here?" Earl asked, eyeing the movement behind the hayloft. Caleb didn't flinch. "No one who's yours to worry about." Earl didn't press, but he lingered. His eyes, sharp as wire, scanned the barn. He said something about cattle prices and frozen fences, but his tone had shifted. Not unfriendly, just cautious. Later that night, Evelyn said, "He saw me." Caleb nodded. "Doesn't matter." But it did. Word spread in ways words never actually had to. At the general store, Mrs. Hartwell asked Caleb if he'd taken on a new hand. "A girl, maybe?" As she rang up his flour. The pastor's wife passed him a folded note at church, offering prayers for any unexpected guests in the barn. Even the crows started perching closer. 3 of them now, on the same wooden beam above the feed trough, watching. And then came the truck again. It didn't stop this time either, but it slowed longer. Evelyn was in the barn when it passed. Caleb stood at the fence, arms folded, rifle nowhere in sight. The man in the truck didn't wave, just stared. After he was gone, Evelyn came to the porch and said nothing. Caleb handed her a cup of water, and they sat in silence, looking at the hills. "I think he's waiting," she finally said, "for someone to say they saw me." Caleb stared at the distance, jaw tight. This land don't owe him truth. "But if the sheriff comes?" Caleb didn't blink. "Then we'll give him coffee too." It wasn't defiance. It was something deeper, like soil choosing not to erode. The world was watching, now. Not just neighbors or men in trucks, but the sky, the frost. The fox that hadn't come near the house in years now circled its steps like a sentinel. A choice hung in the air like breath. To surrender the girl who had run, or to become the last place she'd ever need to. In that stillness, Caleb already knew his answer, and so did the land. That night, the wind howled like it hadn't in weeks. The trees groaned, and the barn walls shivered with every gust. Caleb had offered Evelyn the cot inside the house, just for the night, just till the storm passed. She said yes without hesitation. He cleared a space by the hearth, spread a quilt over the old couch, and poured her a cup of warm milk. They didn't speak much. The fire did most of the talking. When the flames grew low and shadows softened around them, Evelyn broke the silence. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were wet. "I lied to you." Caleb turned slightly, not startled, just listening. She stared into the fire. "When I said I'd give you strong children if you spared me, I didn't mean it like you thought." He didn't interrupt. "I said it because I thought that's what men want. I thought if I made myself useful, I'd be allowed to live." She paused. "That's how I survived, Caleb. I made promises I never meant. I let men believe I was worth something only if I gave them something back." The confession hung in the space like the scent of smoke, bitter, lingering. "I wasn't offering you life, Caleb. I was offering you a lie, and you still gave me your fire, your food, your silence." Her breath hitched, just once. Then she looked at him. "I'm sorry." Caleb didn't move for a long time. The fire cracked. The wind rattled the window pane. Then, slowly, he knelt. Not before her. Not in apology or prayer. He knelt beside the hearth and reached into the wooden box that hadn't been opened since his mother died. He pulled out a folded handkerchief. Delicate, embroidered with blue thread. Worn, but cared for. He handed it to her without speaking. Evelyn held it carefully, unfolding it like it was sacred. "My mother used to say," Caleb finally spoke, voice low, "a woman's worth ain't in what she gives, it's in what she refuses to lose." She looked up, confused. "You didn't lose your voice. Not even then." Her lips trembled. He added, softer, "And you didn't lie to me. You survived. That's different." She held the handkerchief to her chest like it was more than cloth. Outside, the storm began to pass. Inside, something ancient had shifted. Two people, one ashamed of her body, the other ashamed of his silence, had met in the middle, not with noise, not with demands, but with grace. By early spring, the frost began retreating, and with it, so did the silence. Evelyn had started tending to the garden, small patches of earth near the back porch, where nothing much had grown in years. She planted root vegetables with bare hands, and hope, humming softly to herself, as if coaxing the soil to trust her. Caleb watched from the barn, pretending to sand down the gate hinge, though his eyes followed her more than the grain of the wood. They had spoken of her leaving, not out of pressure, but out of honor. When the ground's soft enough, Evelyn had said one morning, "I'll head east, maybe Tennessee, maybe start somewhere that doesn't look like him." Caleb nodded. "You'll need a good pair of boots." But the boots were never bought, because 3 days before she planned to leave, the truck returned, not passing this time, but pulling in. Dust swirled behind it like a veil lifting. The engine cut, and silence fell heavier than before. Evelyn stood on the porch, unmoving. Caleb stepped beside her. His fingers didn't reach for the rifle, just the doorframe. The man who stepped out was wide-shouldered, wearing a denim jacket and a stare that knew how to hurt. Her stepfather. He didn't yell, didn't threaten. He simply said, "She's mine." Evelyn didn't flinch. Caleb asked calmly, "She looked like property to you?" The man looked him up and down. "She's blood." "No." Evelyn said, stepping forward. "You're not my blood. You're what I had to survive." The words landed like stones. The man took a step forward. "You think this place'll save you? You think he will?" Evelyn raised her chin. "I don't need saving. I need remembering. And I came here to remember I was more than what you made of me." The wind picked up, sharp and cold. From the distance, Earl Harmon had arrived on his horse, dismounting slowly by the fence. Then came Mrs. Hartwell in her old sedan, parking along the side road like she'd only come for eggs. One by one, they gathered. Not to fight, not to judge, just to witness. The man looked around. No one spoke, yet no one looked away. He muttered something under his breath, turned, and slammed the truck door. The engine sputtered back to life, and he drove off without another word. Evelyn didn't cry. She just walked into the yard and pulled a weed from between her rows. Mrs. Hartwell brought a tin of cornbread the next morning. Earl dropped off a fresh horseshoe. The pastor's wife offered to teach her how to quilt, and no one asked her what she'd done to deserve their kindness. They simply gave it, like light, returning after too long in the dark. Spring turned into summer with a gentle stubbornness. No fireworks, just warm evenings, and the scent of basil from the garden beds Evelyn had coaxed into life. She didn't leave, not because she couldn't, but because she finally didn't have to. The porch became her place in the early mornings. Caleb would pour 2 mugs of coffee now, one for her, one for him, and they'd sit without filling the air, as if silence itself had become sacred. She started sewing again. Caleb built her a small table by the barn window, where the light hit just right in the afternoon. She stitched slowly, thread looping through stories no one else could read. Dresses for neighbor girls, quilts for the church charity box, a new handkerchief with her name, just Evelyn, nothing else, embroidered in pale blue. The town never held a meeting. No vote was cast, but things shifted quietly. Evelyn joined Sunday service once, sitting at the back beside Mrs. Hartwell, her hands resting still in her lap. No one whispered. No one stared. Earl tipped his hat to her every time he rode past the ranch. And one afternoon, the pastor himself walked all the way to their door with a small bundle wrapped in cloth. A gift, a Bible with a cracked spine and a pressed lily between the pages. "No one should feel like God forgot their name," he said, and left without asking to stay. Caleb's face changed too. The lines in it grew softer, as if something deep beneath his ribs had exhaled for the first time in years. He smiled once in front of her, just once, when the mule nudged her shoulder and she shoved it back with mock scorn. That night, she found a carving on her sewing table, a small cedar figurine, rough and quiet, shaped like a tree with roots. No name, no note, but it stayed there always. Seasons rolled through them like songs hummed from memory. And though the world outside kept spinning with its noise and wars and burnings, this corner of the earth healed itself with hands and water and quiet forgiveness. One evening, long after the last frost had passed, Evelyn walked to the hill behind the barn. From there, the whole valley stretched like an open book. She sat on the ground, hands in her lap, the blanket Caleb had first given her wrapped tight around her shoulders, now clean, repaired, and stitched with new thread at the corners. The stars blinked overhead. She whispered a name she hadn't spoken since childhood, her own, full and unbroken, into the night air. And the land, as if listening, simply held it. Because sometimes the world is changed not by fire, but by someone deciding to stay.